Part 2. So, looking at it this way, it looks as if the French Revolution didn't change much. Politically, maybe not. But in terms of thought, it changed everything. I mean, just killing a king had been considered more or less impossible, even though, of course, the British had already executed Charles I. However, you know, when I went to school and also when I studied history at university, the definition of revolution was a revolution is a rebellion that manages to topple the government and change the system. Revolution is a rebellion that manages a change of political system. But looking at it, and also looking at the revolutions that happened in my lifetime around me, you know, more or less, in Northern Africa and you know, in half of my own country. In that half, that was not my country at the time. I think revolutions mean that afterwards you can think things that were unthinkable before. And this is what happened. This is what happened with the French Revolution. It was a bloodbath, but still, suddenly there was space for new thoughts, thoughts that had never been thought in that radicality and in that freedom before. I mean, this is the Declaration of Human Rights, right? First declaration of human rights is during the French Revolution, followed by the Declaration of the Rights of Women by Olympe de Gouges and supported by Théroigne de Méricourt, two female revolutionaries who both were executed later on, like our proto-feminists. But you know, once thought, once published, this idea that there are human rights, inalienable human rights, and that there are rights of women also, it was in the world. And you know, another very, very important part of the French Revolution did not take place here in Europe, in France, but it took part in a French colony out on Haiti. Haiti, where the slaves rose and took their freedom by force, which was, I mean, extremely rare, extremely special occurrence. And there followed a civilian war with foreign powers intervening, with French colonial soldiers fighting the slaves, and they fought for years. And against all odds, these rebellious slaves, they beat them all. They kicked out the French troops, they kicked out the English troops, they kicked out the Spanish, and I think in 1804 or 1805, they founded their own republic on Haiti. They took their own freedom. They didn't have to be freed as kind of collateral damage in an economic war between plantation owners and an industrialized North, like in the United States. But nothing, I mean, I'm not saying it's no good to be freed as collateral damage or as an ideological excuse. Let's just be freed, right? But, you know, finding the power, the strength and the entitlement, finding the power to say, we deserve to be free and now we fight for it. And then, you know, somehow to get into it and to get it organized and then to prevail and then to make your own state. This is really, really exceptional. And this is really revolutionary. For the second part of the lecture, I've brought you 3 works, all by women, all of roughly the period we are discussing here. One is from the 1780s, 2 years before the oath. One is from 1801. And one is slightly later. One is from 1867, but it fits so well with the subject that I decided to add it anyway. Why do I think it is necessary to bring 3 works by women? The answer is easy. One of the pet questions of the 19th century was, why have there been no great women artists? That is a question that was actually being discussed by important academics, and they found lots of reasons why there hadn't been any women artists. Women are inferior, women are not creative, women are reproductive, so they cannot, there are a lot of motives in there that go back to the 1500s partly, and all, women are busy with other stuff is mainly the answer. And in 1929, a woman as brilliant and of such a sharp, precise mind as Virginia Woolf answered the question in a seminal essay, A Room of One's Own. Please read it. In 1929, Virginia Woolf's answer to the question, why have there been no great women artists, was, well, women were busy. They were busy giving birth to the entire world population, raising them, clothing them, feeding them. Which is true. I mean, so far, there is no person on this world which hasn't been born by a woman. And most of us have been raised by women. So yes, it's true. But it is also kind of a strange answer, coming from a woman whose mother was an artist, whose sister was a famous painter, and who was a famous writer herself, in her own right, and who had no children. But if that was Virginia Woolf's answer in 1929, that means that is the knowledge she had access to in 1929. By now, we know that there have been women artists in all times and ages, everywhere, just like there have been artists of color everywhere at all times, even in Europe, even in the States. And they have even been famous. There are ranges and ranges of famous women artists in the past. And how come Virginia Woolf didn't know about them? Well, and why do we know about them? We know about them because in 1970, Linda Nochlin wrote an excellent article about why have there been no great women artists. And then Germaine Greer followed with The Hidden Talent, a brick of a book about the women artists that were lost and that were written out of history. Yeah. Because there are a number of reasons why women's work, women's artistic work, especially visual work, was lost in the past. 1, in order for your works to last, we've had that, remember, you need to have access to durable materials. Okay, can be a problem. 2nd, in order for your works to last, they must be considered important and preserved. Yeah, very often, stuff women did is like, yeah, that's this bricolage, like it's not so important, it's kind of artisanry, it's not art. Art is made by men. What women do is decoration. 3, very often, women worked as part of the workshop. They worked in their brothers', their fathers', or their husband's company. And they sold the work under their brother's, father's, or husband's name. Because very often, when you put the male name on the piece, you got more money for it. Which is still true today. Works by male artists sell at 40% more than works by women artists at average. That is recent statistics from last year or so. Hasn't changed much in the last 20 years, not at all. So much about the art market. So, meaning if I had a penis, I would make 40% more money. Yeah. Interesting, right? It's about the body. Yeah. So, material, being preserved, being published under your own name, and also, if a piece is preserved and remembered, it needs to be remembered under your name. That also happened a lot. There were good pieces in collections, and art historians, found them significant, of good quality, and attributed them to men, because by definition that could not be by a woman. Yeah. And then even women who were extremely famous and successful and rich in their time, like Angelika Kaufmann or so, they were not considered important by the male art historians who wrote the history books. And they were literally written out of history. Yeah, so many reasons, so many ways in which female artists could vanish. And it's thanks to the feminist art historians since the 1970s that we now know a lot about many, many women from history, and we have recovered them and retrieved them. And a similar effort is going on for artists of color. And it will help us to have a more differentiated idea of our own past and about human life, and also about the reality of life and art. So I think that is really a worthwhile effort. Now, to our examples. The first is by Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, self-portrait by Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun from 1782. So, 3 years before the oath by David. You can see it's more or less in the same neoclassical style. Look at the drapery, look at the loose dress, look at the lighting. The background maybe is Fragonarish, you know, this cloudy, soft background. Look at the lady. It's interesting. There are a lot of contradictions in this painting. You see decisive, open woman. She looks at you directly. Her mouth is slightly open, maybe a kind of a half smile, ironic smile, not so sure. She wears a very elegant silk dress. Look at the fine, very fine organza shawl she's wearing. It's completely transparent. It's costly. And at the same time, she is holding a palette. Now tell me, would you ever go painting in your best silk dress? No, of course not. So this is obviously a mise en scène. She is showing herself as an elegant lady, as well as a painter. She's showing herself as a modern lady, because she is dressed rather daringly in this loose neoclassical style, this kind of antique drapery, pretty much cleavage, and she's wearing this very informal summer hat. So what she's conveying is, I am beautiful, I am skillful, I am, I know who I am a person of importance, I am a painter, but I'm also relaxed, I'm also kind of laid back, I'm this country girl, I'm an elegant lady masked as a country girl, which was extremely fashionable for the time. There are all these paintings of Marie Antoinette as a shepherdess, and actually Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun painted a large number of portraits of Marie Antoinette. So who is this lady? Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun was the court painter of Marie Antoinette in the Ancien Régime. She was a household name at a time, well known as a painter. She was a painter's daughter, the daughter of Louis Vigée, and she was actually accepted into the Royal Painters Society. And even today, I found an article about her on the internet that said, Vigée-Lebrun was grudgingly admitted into the Royal Society because of her connections to the Queen. And that is the kind of art history that we still have today, that somehow a woman's work must be devalued in that way. Because, all the other painters who were in that Royal Academy, do you think they had no royal patronage or someone else? And do you really think Vigée-Lebrun would have accepted if her work hadn't been exceptional? Do you really think that a friendship with the Queen would have been enough? And much more important, her work is still alive. like 250 years later, her work is still fresh, while the work of many of her colleagues has faded, has lost its power, and doesn't rouse our emotions anymore. Looking at Vigée-Lebrun, and remember this is a self-portrait, this is how she wants us to see her. Looking at Vigée-Lebrun, we see this self-assured lady who is able to navigate the contradictions of her existence quite well. The contradictions of being an important lady at court, and at the same time of being an artisan, being a painter who gets her hands dirty. She's not showing her dirty hands. There are other painters slightly later who did this, female painters. You see her as a lady who's navigating the contrast between the old style in the background, this cloudy sky, this very, very, fine, slightly misty cloudy sky, and the new times, wearing this neoclassical dress, and it's also in the lighting, it's also in this very clear lighting. The draperies of her dress, you could carve it looking at that painting. Look at her artfully disheveled coiffure, at that laid-back straw hat. Okay, so this is Vigée-Lebrun presenting herself as a painter, as well as a woman of substance and importance. This is someone with agency. This is someone who has a voice. Now, let's look at the next piece, which is 20 years later, by a young painter about whom we don't know so much, Marie-Denise Villers, young woman drawing, 1801. It's quite a large painting, 160 by 120. That is a professional claim. When you paint a canvas of that size, that is a professional claim. And look at her. Very different from Vigée-Lebrun. Look, no jewelry. Very simple. Simple dress. No colors. Look at her hair. An extremely simple hairdo. I know that Vigée-Lebrun looked like she had just had a roll in the hay, but still it was artful. She didn't really look disheveled. It was clear that this was artificial. Now, Villers, this is the kind of hairdo you or I do ourselves, at home in front of the mirror or even without a mirror. This is really a young revolutionary. This is really a young neoclassical. Also look at the background, look at the setting she provides. Isn't it interesting how the setting looks so clear and uncluttered, with the light coming from the back, with this huge window, and these bare boards and the bare walls, and no ornament except the drapery on her chair? And now compare this to Vigée-Lebrun. How complicated the Vigée-Lebrun painting looks, even though it is much emptier. How much more, kind of sophisticated the Vigée-Lebrun outfit is, and how the background, even though there isn't much of it, seems much more crowded than what Villers provides us with. However, when you look at Villers, there are also similarities. Both women look us straight in the eye. Both women show that they are artists and consider themselves professionals. Villers even shows herself in the act of drawing. She's actually working, different from the court lady who is kind of representing. So Villers is in action, and she's looking at us because she is drawing us. That means she is seeing us, recognizing us, and she is the one defining us with the lines on her sketch pad. And you must realize that it was quite hard for women to get an education as an artist if they didn't come from artistic families, like both did. Villers did, and Vigée-Lebrun also. It was not allowed for women to study the nude. It was considered improper. And there were no art schools for women until the late 19th century. But then they were in France. The first one was actually the Académie Julian in Paris, and women from all over the world went there because they wanted to study art. So, what is she doing? She knows, Villers knows she is doing something that is not the usual thing. Of course, art education was part of female education, but not like this, not large-scale portrait drawing. And the way she is looking at us puts her very much in charge. And this straight gaze of the artist is very much not the done thing by a woman. And I'm sure a lot of women here know that situation, because still today that can happen to you when you're a young woman in certain places. When you look the men straight in the eye, they think you are coming on to them. And then afterwards, there is a lot of work to be done to get rid of them just because you look them in the eye. And now have a look at one interesting detail in the back. Can you see that window in the lower right? Can you see that actually there is a crack in the window and part of the window pane is missing? So at first, of course, this is a professional artist showing off. Really. A lot of artists do that. It's part of the business. You have to do it, and it's also fun. You need to show people what you know to do. And especially when you're a woman and they always underestimate you. What she's doing here, she's showing them, I can paint so well. I can paint the difference between seeing a landscape through the window and seeing the landscape without a glass. And I think that is pretty impressive. It also makes the place where she is even more simple. The window isn't mended. What kind of rundown place is that? Yeah, no carpet on the ground, no window mended, and still she doesn't look destitute or anything. She just doesn't care so much. There's other stuff that is more important. And that is, of course, very similar to the oath, right? That is similar to the hierarchy. This is about other things, things, ideas, which are more important than decoration. And of course, there is also another way to look at this, because we have here a young woman who normally would have grown up in a very protected way, who the limits of whose range would have been very clearly defined by the necessity to protect her virtue, first as a virgin and then as a married woman. And that would not have most probably not have included working as a professional painter and publicly showing her work. And it would not have included to look straight at other people and probably men to draw them. I mean, there is still now, when you're a young woman, there are enough places where when you look the men straight in the eye, they think you're coming on to them. And then you have a lot of, border defending to do. Now imagine the same thing 200 years ago. And what she shows is the glass between her and the world is gone. It's right there, it's right at her back. She's looking at us, but it's only one movement of her head, and then she is in direct contact with the world, with no limitation whatsoever between her and outside. Because that also, like David identified women with weakness and emotion, and men with a state. So of course, women's circle was supposed to be inside the home. It was not supposed to be the world. It was not supposed to be the city. It was not supposed to be politics. But when you look at this young woman, you can see that she will probably not be stopped by that kind of idea. And the broken window behind her shows that let's say, the confinement of women is over. So that's quite a good interpretation as far as interpretations go, isn't it? However, what I've been doing here is interpreting Villers' work first as personal, and then slightly more general as a statement of a woman about women. That is what very often happens to works by women, that they're interpreted as personal biographical statements, and at most as a statement about what it means to be a woman, while works by male artists, like The Oath, are often, much more easily interpreted as statement about the general political situation or general cultural situation. And of course, the Villers portrait can be seen as a major statement about a state of mind in the midst of a revolution and a new social and cultural and political order. If you don't look at her as a woman, but as a human being who has something general to say, then suddenly the broken window is not just about the confinement of women anymore, but it is about new possibilities for the majority of the population, for a majority that used to be, or that was born into limited rights, and who grew up suddenly possessing inalienable human rights. And they all are sitting next to a broken window that opens onto a new world to which they have access, which before they had not. So this isn't just a woman sitting here, but this is a new person in a new world, ready to discover it with the means at her disposal. Now, the Villers story is actually an example of the kind I told you, because this painting, for many, many years, was attributed to Jacques-Louis David. And the attribution was only corrected, I think, in the 90s. Marie-Denise Villers was quite well known during her lifetime. She lived between 1770 and I think she died around 1821. And during that time, she was an active painter. She came from a family of painters. She showed in the Salon de Paris, which was the yearly exhibition of new important works of art. It was something like the top 10, or top 100 of what's going on in contemporary art. She even won prizes and awards, so she was well known. But after her death, she was forgotten like so many, and most of her works were attributed to, as I said, Jacques-Louis David, or to her painter, another well-known male classicist painter, her teacher, Anne Giraudet-Triozon. The interesting thing is that when I tried to find out more about her 10 years ago, it was very hard to find good information about her. But by now, she's actually made it into the major art history works, overviews, and there is even quite a good Wikipedia article on her. So there is stuff happening, and we are recovering the past, we are retrieving the past, we are reforging the narrative of the past to be more inclusive. Number 3, the third work I've brought you, is one I'm very fond of. It's much later, it's 1867, it's by Edmonia Lewis. Edmonia Lewis was a citizen of the United States, born in the 1840s, as a child to probably a man of color from Haiti, Haiti, black state by that time, and a First Nation woman. We know very little about her. It's very interesting and very telling that the data gaps, history's data gaps, include the knowledge of a person about themselves. Because Edmonia Lewis gave as her birthday the 4th of July. And during her day, there were a lot of Americans born on the 4th of July, because that was the date you gave when you weren't sure about your birthday. It's very hard to know more about Edmonia Lewis, or about her origins, because she told a lot of lovely stories, which I imagine were also her way of dealing with discrimination and the stupid stereotypes she was being confronted with on a daily basis. Because she told a lot of stories about being a wild Indian maiden from the plains and so on. But she was just born in Plain, Massachusetts. Her brother made a fortune in the Californian gold rush, and said, Edmonia, anything you want? And she said, yes, I want to go to college and study art. And he sent her to college, to Oberlin actually, which was the first American college to admit women. She studied art. She managed to produce works, to sell works, and to make enough money to finance a trip to Rome. Also, look at it. David got a state grant, she got a grant from her brother, and then she made her own money to finance a trip to Rome, studied antiquity, and actually managed to become a well-established, renowned, famous artist with an international reputation who made a living from her art. Of course, there's still great gaps, but I think we should look at the art and let it speak for itself. This is one of Lewis's better known works, Forever Free, from 1867. The original title being The Morning of Liberty. The Morning, interesting. It's approximately 1 meter high, so there is already the mark of the professional again. It's not monumental like Michelangelo's David or the Venus of Milo or so, but it is also quite far from a small marble piece that you would put as a knick-knack on your desk or something. 1 meter high, that is considerable. Also, it is not so easy to obtain a marble block and to transport a marble block that is 1 meter high, and it's even less easy, of course, to work it. So we have two figures here. One, a man standing upright, the left arm raised over his head, and next to him a kneeling woman, the hands folded in a supplicating gesture before her chest. Both are looking up towards the light, which may have to do with the original title, The Morning of Liberty. They're looking up into the morning light. And see him, look at him, and this, again, these clear-cut, neoclassical poses. There is nothing superfluous here, no curlicues, no ornament. It's mostly the bodies, some drapery, but very simple. And then look at him. He's holding up something. I'm not sure what it is. I cannot see it. I need to go and see the original sometime. But the most important thing is on his left hand, you see the half of a pair of broken manacles, and the other half is under his feet. Obviously, these are the broken chains of slavery. It's interesting that the man's posture, in a way, mirrors torchbearer, the torchbearer motive from antiquity, which was often associated with morning. I mean, the morning coming, the light coming back. But also the Statue of Liberty, like with raised arm, and it is something like a torch or something what he's holding. It would be interesting to find out. While the female figure here, is completely different. Kneeling, supplicated, in this crouching posture, looking up too, certainly, maybe hopeful, maybe praying, maybe just a very different reaction to the same thing here. So, here's the morning of liberty, and he meets it upright, with a straight gaze, with his chest out, proudly, while she meets it humbly and gratefully and praying. That is one possible interpretation. The statue was produced 4 years after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation that abolished slavery. And of course, at the time already, when the work was on display, it was read as an abolitionist statement, which, you know, seeing the broken manacles seems like overwhelmingly clear. However, there has been discussion about the female figure, because the question is this woman really free? Is she really as much freed as her partner? And there are several possibilities here, interesting to discuss, because one possibility is, of course, that this different reaction to the new morning of liberty is what Edmonia Lewis considered the appropriate female response, like this deep awe, a kind of humble hopefulness. You see how the statue here echoes the oath of the Hirashi. See that? The strong male stance and the sunken, softer emotional form of the female, right? So this may be echoing the stereotypes of the 19th century about male strength and female softness and emotion. However, Edmonia Lewis led a completely different life from that. I mean, she must have fought those stereotypes and transcended those stereotypes continuously during her lifetime. I mean, traveling alone to Rome as a woman at the time to become a sculptor was quite a thing, and doing it as the child of a Chippewa mother and a father from Haiti, she was probably the only one who did that. So the question is here, did she still believe in the stereotypes, even though she herself lived a life that didn't really fulfill these stereotypes? Similar to Virginia Woolf, like, why have there been no great women artists, forgetting her mother, forgetting her sister, seeing them as special cases? Or was she maybe just catering to what the public would expect from her? Like, yeah? Or maybe, is there a hidden criticism that the abolition of slavery did not set women free in the same way as men? Because even if the most blatant oppression of slavery is removed, women, of course, still have to bear the limits of sexism. And this may be echoed in here, because if we know very little about Edmonia Lewis, but we can be sure that she knew what racism and sexism were. So, possibilities. We can look forward to scholars finding out more about Edmonia Lewis and maybe finding more evidence about it. The interesting thing is, coming back to our idea of reader response criticism, the interesting thing is maybe that she gives us the possibility today to read it differently, to read it in this more complex way. And yes, as I said, we still know so little about Edmonia Lewis, though our knowledge has grown considerably. When I first heard about her maybe 10, 12 years ago, we hardly even knew when she was born and when she died, and there was practically nothing known about her family, and all that is been much better now. So again, another history that is being retrieved so that we will have a better understanding of where we come from, in order to keep us from reducing our present to stereotypes which weren't even true at the time they were generated. Okay, summary. We've looked at 3 works by 3 women from 3 different generations, and you see how women at the time, A, actually managed to produce artwork of high quality in spite of all the odds, B, managed to be well known, famous, get awards, work on a professional level, C, how they made
profound statements, not just about what it meant to be women in their time, but about their times in general. And D, how in spite of that, so many of them were forgotten because they were not considered important by those who came after them and those who wrote history. And I promise that we will be looking at works by artists of color that will be not about slavery or linked to slavery in any way.